I didn't come to the office to save anyone. I came to get the truth. I stepped onto that top floor and heard the sound of a heavy chair smashing through a glass partition. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world you are tuning in from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. My name is Alexander. I am a father, and 2 years away from the front lines of investigative reporting felt longer than it should have. I walked into the wreckage of the CEO's office, where Tracy was standing with a heavy wrench in her hand and fire in her eyes. The air smelled like ozone and burnt circuits. She looked at me as if I were just another person she could buy or break. I didn't back down. I stepped over the glass, looked at the ruined machine, and said, "If you're trying to kill the evidence, you're doing it wrong. If you're trying to find your soul, you're getting close." The destruction in the room was absolute. Tracy had not just broken things. She had declared war on her own environment. She stood in the center of the debris, her breathing heavy and her expensive clothes disheveled. She was the head of one of the largest companies in the country. But in that moment, she looked like a person who had finally reached their breaking point. I stood my ground and did not move. I told her that I was a reporter she was supposed to meet, but I also made it clear that I wasn't there to write the puff piece her PR team wanted. I told her I was aware of the betrayal by her partner, Ryan, and that I had the documents to prove he was stripping the company of its assets. Tracy's reaction was immediate and loud. She shouted at me to leave and threatened to destroy my career, but I remained solid. I told her that I had faced much worse than a billionaire with a wrench. I explained that after years of reporting on wars and corruption, I had walked away to raise my daughter, Lily, in a world that was honest and safe. I told her that I had no price, and that her money meant nothing to me. This honesty seemed to shock her more than my presence did. She realized that for the first time in years, she was talking to someone who didn't want anything from her. She eventually sat down among the ruins of her office and began to talk. She told me how Ryan had manipulated her and the board of directors. She explained that she felt trapped in a life that was all about appearances and profit, while her true passion for innovation was being suffocated. She confessed that she had smashed the prototype because she couldn't stand to see it fall into Ryan's hands. I listened to her without judgment. I told her that the only way to beat a man like Ryan was to stop playing his game. I told her that truth and love always start from the heart, and that she had to decide if she was brave enough to be real. As the morning light began to hit the shattered glass on the floor, the tension in the room changed. Tracy looked at me and saw a man who was happy with a simple life and a daughter who loved him. She felt a deep envy for that peace. She told me that everyone in her life was a fixer or a liar, and that I was the first person who felt like a solid wall she could lean on. It was then that she made her move. She asked me if I would go out with her. She didn't mean a fancy date at a gala. She wanted to see the world I lived in. She wanted to know if a person like her could ever find the quiet happiness I had. I agreed to her request, but I set the rules. I told her that she would have to leave her titles and her temper at the door. I told her that if we were going to do this, it had to be based on the truth. I warned her that Ryan would likely try to use our connection to hurt us both, but I assured her that I was brave enough to handle him. I told her that my priority was always Lily, and that if she brought drama into my daughter's life, I would walk away without a second thought. Tracy accepted these terms because she was desperate for something authentic. The rest of the morning was spent making a plan. I told her I would take her to my neighborhood, far away from the glass towers and the shouting of the corporate world. I described my small apartment and the park where Lily played. I told her that she would see a side of life she had forgotten existed. Tracy seemed lighter after our conversation, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She realized that the front lines of the corporate war weren't the only place to live. I left the building and drove back to the suburbs. As I watched the city skyline in my rearview mirror, I thought about the risk I was taking. I knew that Ryan was a powerful enemy and that he would not like a nobody like me getting close to Tracy. But I also knew that I was a father who would do anything to protect what was right. I spent the afternoon with Lily, playing in the yard and enjoying the simple rhythm of our life. I felt more solid than ever. That evening, I spoke with my friend Eric. He was worried that I was getting involved with a storm that would blow my house down. I told him that I had built my house on the heart, and that no amount of corporate wind could shake it. I told him that Tracy wasn't the monster the papers made her out to be. She was just a woman who had lost her way. I was determined to show her the path back to herself. By the time I went to bed, I had a clear vision for our first meeting. It wouldn't be about power or money. It would be about two people trying to find something real in a world full of fakes. I knew that Chapter 2 would bring its own challenges, especially when Ryan found out. But I was ready. I had the truth on my side, and I had a heart that knew exactly what it was fighting for. I fell asleep feeling certain that love always finds a way if you are brave enough to let it start from the heart. After the chaos in the office, the quiet of my neighborhood felt like a different world. I spent the next morning making pancakes for Lily and listening to her talk about her school projects. It was a solid life I had worked so hard to build. But even as I flipped the pancakes, I knew the peace wouldn't last. Tracy was a woman who moved like a storm, and I had just stepped into the center of it. I had told her that love starts in the heart, and I meant it. But I also knew that men like Ryan didn't care about hearts. They only cared about winning. The trouble started on a Tuesday afternoon. I was outside my small apartment, working on a set of architectural blueprints on a folding table. The sun was warm, and the neighborhood was quiet, until the sound of a high-end engine broke the silence. A clean, shiny car, the kind that cost more than my entire education, pulled up to the curb. The paint was so black it looked like a mirror, reflecting the modest houses and the cracked sidewalks of my street. Ryan stepped out of the car. He looked exactly like the corporate raider the newspapers described. His suit was perfectly pressed, his hair was slicked back, and he wore a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He looked at my building with a look of pure disgust, as if he were afraid the peeling paint might stain his shoes. He walked up to my table and didn't bother with an introduction. He just looked at my drawings and laughed. He started the conversation by trying to buy me. He told me that he knew I was spending time with Tracy, and that he understood why a man in my position would be tempted by a woman of her status. He offered me a consulting fee to walk away and never speak to her again. He talked about money as if it were the only language in the world. He told me that a single dad living in a place like this had no business being in the same room as a woman like Tracy. I didn't get angry. I didn't shout. I just stood up and looked him in the eye. I told him that his money was no good here. I explained that I wasn't with Tracy for her company or her bank account. I was with her because she was a person who was tired of being surrounded by fakes like him. I told him that he could keep his clean car and his shiny suits, because they couldn't cover up the fact that he was empty inside. I told him to leave my neighborhood and never come back. Ryan's smile disappeared. The shouting and pressure Tracy had told me about finally came out. He warned me that I was making a mistake. He told me that I had a lot to lose, especially since I had a daughter to think about. He didn't make a direct threat, but the way he said Lily's name made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. He got back into his car and drove away, leaving a cloud of expensive exhaust in the air. The sabotage began the very next day. I was working on a major design project for a local community center. It was the project that was going to secure my financial future for the next year. My boss called me into his office and told me that a private investor had pulled the funding. He said that someone had sent over a file of anonymous complaints about my past reporting work, claiming I was a liability and a troublemaker. I knew immediately it was Ryan. He was trying to take away my livelihood to prove that I was weak. I spent the afternoon sitting on my porch, staring at the street. I had a choice to make. I could call Tracy and tell her that it was over. I could go back to my quiet life, find a different job, and keep Lily safe from corporate war. If I left Tracy, Ryan would stop the attacks. My career would be safe, and the smoke would clear. But as I thought about Tracy's face when she had asked me to go out with her, I realized I couldn't do it. She was finally finding her soul, and if I left now, she would fall right back into the trap. I realized that being brave wasn't just about standing up to a man in a suit. It was about being loyal to the truth, even when it cost you something. I decided that I wouldn't choose my career over my heart. I called my boss and told him I would finish the project for free if I had to, because the community needed it. Then I called Tracy. I told her everything that had happened. I told her about Ryan's visit and the sabotage of my project. I expected her to apologize or try to fix it with her money, but she didn't. She just listened. Then she told me that she was proud of me. She said that Ryan had done the same thing to everyone she had ever cared about. But I was the first one who hadn't folded. She told me she was coming over to my place because she couldn't stay in her glass cage any longer. When Tracy arrived that evening, she wasn't wearing a suit. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater. She looked like a different person. We sat on the floor of my tiny studio, eating simple food and talking about the future. I told her that Ryan was going to get more desperate. I warned her that he would try to frame us or humiliate us in the press. Tracy just reached for my hand and told me she didn't care. She said that for the first time in her life, she felt calm. I looked at her and realized that the sabotage had failed. Ryan wanted to break my spirit, but he had only made my bond with Tracy stronger. He wanted to make me feel small, but I felt like a giant because I was protecting something real. I told Tracy that we were going to fight back, but not with his dirty tactics. We were going to win by being honest and staying solid. That night, after Tracy left, I checked on Lily. She was sleeping soundly, unaware of the billionaires and the corporate schemes swirling around us. I felt a deep sense of peace. I knew that the fierce showdown was still coming, and I knew that Ryan had more tricks up his sleeve. But I also knew that love always starts from the heart, and my heart was locked in. I had chosen my loyalty over my comfort, and that made me more powerful than Ryan could ever imagine. I sat back down at my table and started a new set of drawings. They weren't just for a building anymore. They were a blueprint for a new life. I was ready for whatever the next chapter would bring. I was a father, a reporter, and a man who wouldn't back down. The silent sabotage was over, and the real battle was about to begin. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My dad said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show him that these tales matter. Please subscribe to this channel, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay hidden. Now let's continue. The fallout didn't happen in a courtroom or a boardroom. It happened at midnight, after the visit from Ryan and the sabotage of my architectural project. I knew the situation was reaching a boiling point. I had stayed solid for Tracy, and I had refused to let Ryan's threats move me. But the corporate world doesn't stop just because you choose to be honest. The pressure was building like a summer storm, and on a Thursday night, it finally broke. I was asleep when the pounding on my door started. It wasn't a polite knock. It was the sound of someone desperate. I grabbed my flashlight and checked on Lily first. She was still sleeping, her small chest rising and falling in the quiet of our apartment. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. It was Tracy. She was standing in the hallway, soaked from head to toe. Heavy rain was lashing against the building, and she looked like she had walked through miles of it. I opened the door, and she practically fell into the room. She wasn't the Iron CO anymore. She was trembling, her expensive clothes ruined by the mud and the rain. She told me that the fallout had finally hit. Ryan had made his move. He had leaked a series of fake documents to the press, claiming that Tracy was mentally unstable and that she was being manipulated by a dangerous man with a criminal past. He had used my history as a reporter, specifically the times I had been arrested while covering protests or war zones, to make me look like a threat. He called the police. "Alexander," she whispered, her voice shaking. He told them I was being held here against my will. He wants to create a scandal so big that the board will have no choice but to remove me tonight. I realized then that this wasn't just about a job or a reputation anymore. This was about our safety. Ryan was using the shouting and pressure of the legal system to corner us. If the police arrived and found the CEO of Plank Industries in a handyman's apartment in the middle of a breakdown, the story would be written before we could ever say a word. I knew I had to act fast. I wasn't scared for myself, but I was terrified for Lily. I couldn't let her wake up to flashing lights and shouting men. I told Tracy to go into the bathroom and dry off while I packed a bag. I moved with the solid precision I had learned on the front lines. I grabbed Lily's favorite blanket, some clothes, and my laptop, which held the evidence against Ryan. I woke Lily up gently. I told her we were going on a midnight adventure to a secret castle. She was groggy, but she trusted me. She saw Tracy and reached out a small hand. Sensing that the pretty lady was sad, we didn't take my truck. I knew Ryan would have people looking for it. Instead, I called Eric. Even though he had warned me that Tracy was too much smoke, he was still my best friend. He showed up 5 minutes later in his old, beat-up van that smelled like with shavings and cold coffee. He didn't ask questions. He just saw the look on my face and pointed the back seat. Where to? Eric asked as we pulled away from the curb, just as a set of headlights turned onto my street. The motel by the lake, I said. The one that's been closed for the season. Nobody will look for a CEO in a place that doesn't have 5 stars. The drive was long and quiet. Tracy sat in the back with Lily, who eventually fell back to sleep against Tracy's shoulder. It was a strange sight. The most powerful woman in the city finding comfort in the presence of a 5-year-old girl. Tracy looked out the window at the rain, and I could tell she was mourning the life she was leaving behind. I told her that she wasn't losing anything real. I told her that the glass towers and the shiny cars were just a cage, and that the real world was out here in the dark with us. We arrived at the motel just as the rain began to turn into a light mist. The building was old, with flickering neon signs and doors that creaked, but it was safe. It was the kind of place where people want to disappear, and right now, that was exactly what we needed. I paid the manager in cash and led Tracy and Lily to a small room at the end of the hall. It smelled like old carpet and lemon cleaner, but it was dry. Tracy sat on the edge of the bed and looked around. I spent so long choosing what kept everyone else calm, she said, echoing the words she had said in her office. I forgot about my own heart. Now I have nothing left. I sat down next to her and took her hand. You have the truth, I said. And you have me. Love doesn't start with fixing or proving anything, Tracy. It starts right here. I tapped her chest, just like I had during our first meeting. Ryan thinks he can break you by taking away your toys, but he can't take away the fact that you're brave enough to run. We spent the rest of the night working. While Lily slept, Tracy and I sat at the small table with my laptop. I showed her how to organize the files I had gathered on Ryan corruption. We stayed up until the sun started to peek over the lake, turning the water into a sheet of silver. We weren't just a reporter and a CEO anymore. We were a team. As the morning light filled the room, Tracy looked at me and smiled. It wasn't the sharp, professional smile I had seen on the news. It was soft and real. She told me that for the first time in years, she didn't feel the pressure of being Tracy G. Plank. She just felt like Tracy. She said that she realized she didn't want to save the company anymore. She wanted to save herself. I told her that the next step was the hardest. We had to go back and face the fierce showdown. We couldn't stay in the shelter forever. Ryan would find us eventually, and we had to be ready to end it on our terms. I told her that I would be right beside her, and that my solid heart wouldn't move an inch. The motel by the lake had been our sanctuary, but the storm was passing. I looked at Lily, who was waking up and asking for breakfast, and then at Tracy, who was standing tall again. The silent sabotage had failed, and the midnight escape had given us the strength we needed. Are you ready? I asked. Tracy nodded, her eyes full of fire again, but this time it wasn't the fire of rage. It was the fire of a woman who knew she was loved. Let's go find the truth, she said. We walked out of Eric's van as the birds began to sing in the trees by the water. The air was cold and fresh. I knew that Chapter 4 would be the fight of our lives, But as I started the engine, I felt a sense of peace. Love had started from the heart, and now it was going to finish the job. The drive back to the city was quiet, but it wasn't the heavy silence of defeat. It was the calm before the battle. I drove Eric's van straight to the glass towers of Plank Industries. The morning sun was reflecting off the building, making it look like a giant pillar of ice. I looked at Tracy. She had her head held high, and though she was wearing simple clothes from my closet, she had never looked more like a leader. "I'm going in with you," I said as I parked the van. "Ryan thinks he's fighting a CEO. He doesn't realize he's fighting a father who has nothing to lose." We walked through the lobby. The security guards tried to stop us, but Tracy didn't even look at them. She walked with such purpose that they simply stepped aside. We took the elevator to the 50th floor. When the doors opened, the office was buzzing. Board members were whispering in groups, and there, in the center of the room, was Ryan. He was leaning against a desk, drinking coffee, and looking like he had already won. When he saw us, his smile faltered for a split second before returning as a cold sneer. "Tracy," he said, spreading his arms wide, "and the handyman. I see you spent the night in hiding. The board is just about to vote on your removal for gross negligence and instability." I stepped forward before Tracy could speak. I didn't shout. I didn't use shouting and pressure. I just pulled out my laptop and set it on the conference table. "The vote is going to have to wait," I said. The board members gathered around. I showed them the truth. I showed them the digital trail of Ryan's secret bank accounts, the emails where he negotiated the sale of Tracy's technology to competitors, and the fake documents he had manufactured to smear my name. As a former investigative reporter, I knew how to build a case that couldn't be broken. Ryan's face turned from white to a sickly gray. He tried to laugh it off, calling it fabricated nonsense. But the evidence was solid. Tracy stepped up beside me. She didn't hit him, and she didn't throw a chair. She just looked at him with pity. "You thought you could break me by taking away the building and the title," Tracy said, her voice steady and clear. "But Alexander showed me that those things aren't where my power comes from. My power starts in my heart, and you can't touch that." The board members, realizing Ryan was a sinking ship, immediately turned on him. By the end of the hour, security was escorting Ryan out of the building. He didn't look like a billionaire anymore. He looked like a small, desperate man who'd been caught in a lie. But the real surprise came next. The head of the board turned to Tracy and asked her to take her seat. They offered her a massive bonus and a public apology. They wanted the Iron CO back. Tracy looked at the big leather chair and the view of the city. Then she looked at me, standing by the door with my old tool bag. She looked at the drawings I had made for the community center. She turned back to the board and shook her head. "I'm resigning," she said. The room went silent. She explained that she didn't want to live in a world of smoke and glass anymore. She wanted to build something real. She wanted a life where she could breathe, where she could have dinner with a family, and where she didn't have to look over her shoulder. She walked over to me, took my hand, and we walked out of that office for the last time. We didn't go to a fancy restaurant to celebrate. We went to the park near my house. The trees still leaned the same way, and the air smelled like cut grass. Lily was there, playing on the swings. When she saw Tracy, she ran over and hugged her. "Is the adventure over, Daddy?" Lily asked. "The old one is," I said, looking at Tracy, "but a new one is just starting." Life found a new rhythm after that. Tracy didn't stay idle. She used her skills to help me finish the community center project. She became a free agent, working on projects that actually help people. She moved into a house just down the street from mine, and most nights, she was at our table for dinner. Ryan faded out, without his status and his lies. He was nothing. Eric started dropping by again, bringing over pizza and laughing at how the single dad had managed to tame the most dangerous woman in the corporate world. But I knew better. I hadn't tamed her. I had just stood still long enough for her to find herself. One night, sitting on the porch swing, Tracy leaned her head on my shoulder. The streetlights flickered on, and the neighborhood was quiet. "You didn't try to save me, Alexander," she said softly. "I just stood my ground." I replied, "I knew you were strong enough to save yourself." I had come back to the city thinking I was just a father and a contractor, but I had found something much bigger. I realized that bravery isn't about how hard you can hit or how much money you can make. It's about being solid when the world is shaking. It's about knowing that no matter how much glass breaks around you, love always starts from the heart. And once it starts there, nothing can stop it. This story teaches us that true strength is not found in social status, wealth, or the ability to intimidate others, but in the solid integrity of one's character. Alexander demonstrates that being brave means standing your ground for the truth and protecting your family, while Tracy learned that a life built on shouting and pressure is a cage that can only be escaped by following the heart. Ultimately, the narrative shows that love and peace are not transactions to be managed, but rewards for those who are honest enough to be themselves. So here's the real question. Did you subscribe yet? Thousands of people will listen to this story and won't subscribe. Please don't be that person. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My dad said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show him that these tales matter. Please subscribe to this channel, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. And here's what I need to know. Do you want part 2?